His secret shocked everyone. My stingy billionaire grandfather gave everyone just $10. Months later, the first time I heard my grandfather's name spoken like a prayer, I was 9 years old in a grocery store aisle. A man in a suit recognized the last name on my mother's credit card and leaned down to tell me, as if he was letting me in on something holy. Your granddad built an empire. You're set for life, kid. My mother's face went tight in a way that told me not to respond. She didn't correct him. She didn't thank him. She just slid the card back into her wallet and steered me toward the checkout. In our house, we didn't talk about being set. We talked about rent, about keeping the car running, about making dinner stretch. My grandfather existed like a headline that didn't belong to us, a story everyone else repeated. When I turned 26, the headline became a phone call. He didn't call me, his assistant did. Mr. Cassie, Halston would like you to attend a family meeting, she said. Her voice sounded like clean glass. Saturday, 11 a.m., Halston House. Halston House wasn't a house. It was a property with gates and a nameplate, the kind of place people mention in invitations. Like, it's a city. I took the train out of habit, then a rideshare from the station because the road past the last town stopped being walkable. The driver kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, the way people do when they're trying to decide whether you belong in the place you're going. At the gate, a security guard compared my face to a tablet screen, then waved me through without a word. The driveway curved through manicured trees toward a long building of pale stone with windows that reflected the sky. It felt like arriving at a museum that had never welcomed the public. Inside, the air smelled like lemon polish and old money. Quiet. Controlled. The kind of quiet that made you lower your voice without being asked. I was shown to a sitting room with high ceilings and a rug so thick my shoes sank into it. A fire crackled even though it wasn't cold. There were family photos framed on shelves, crisp staged images of people on yachts and at charity galas, everyone smiling like they'd never had an argument they couldn't edit. My name didn't appear in any of them. My grandfather entered without hurry, as if time had to adjust itself around him. Gideon Halston. He was smaller than I expected, but he moved like someone who had never been told no. Gray hair, neat. Skin drawn tight over his cheekbones. He wore a navy sweater and slacks like a uniform. No jewelry. No watch. A man who didn't need to display his wealth because it already displayed him. Behind him came the rest of the Halstons. My Aunt Clarice first. Perfect hair, perfect smile. The kind that looked trained. My Uncle Ronan with a tan that didn't come from work. Cousins I'd only seen online. Lila with an influencer's face and a phone already in her hand, and my older cousin Marcus who carried himself like a CEO in waiting. They moved into the room like they owned it. They did. Clarice spotted me and did a quick, surprised blink. Oh, she said, drawing the word out like she was reading it off a card. So you actually came. Marcus looked me up and down. His eyes paused at my shoes. Obviously not custom, obviously not chosen by a stylist. You're the grandkid from the other side, he said, smiling. Right. I nodded once. I didn't offer my hand. It wasn't needed. They weren't here to meet me. I was here to be placed. My grandfather sat in an armchair near the fire, his posture straight, his hands resting lightly on the wood arms. A leather folder sat on the table beside him. He didn't waste words. We're here, he said, because I'm making an adjustment. Clarice leaned forward. Ronan's face softened into something hungry. Lila shifted her phone so the camera faced upward, like she might accidentally catch something. Marcus tried to look calm, but his knee bounced once and then stilled when he noticed me looking. I'm 84, my grandfather continued. I'm not immortal. I want my affairs arranged in a way that doesn't invite confusion. He said confusion like it was a moral failing. A man in a suit stepped into the room. Older, thin, holding a legal pad. An attorney. Behind him came the assistant I'd spoken to, carrying a small stack of envelopes. My grandfather nodded at the envelopes. Everyone will receive something today, he said. Clarice let out a breath that sounded like relief. Ronan's mouth pulled into a pleased line. Marcus leaned back like he'd already won. I stayed still. When you grow up being told you should be grateful for scraps, you learn the difference between a gift and a performance. This felt like a performance. The assistant moved around the room, passing each person an envelope. Thick, cream-colored paper, sealed, When she reached me, she placed mine on the table in front of me, with a polite nod, like she was serving a course. Clarice tore hers open immediately. Ronan did the same. Lila angled her phone toward her lap, as if she was texting, but her eyes flicked between the envelope and my grandfather. Marcus waited 2 seconds longer than the others, then opened his. A moment of silence followed, heavy enough to change the air. Clarice blinked at the contents, then laughed once, sharp. Ronan's face went red. Marcus stared at his envelope like it had insulted him. Lila's mouth fell open. I didn't open mine yet. I watched them with the steady, "What is this?" Clarice demanded, holding up a small rectangular card like it was evidence. Ronan shook his envelope. "Is this a joke?" Marcus stood. "Grandfather." My grandfather held up one finger without looking at him. It was the simplest gesture in the room, and it stopped Marcus mid-sentence. "No one interrupts me," my grandfather said. He looked at each of them, calm as a judge. "You've all received $10, he said. "A bill, a crisp one. Consider it symbolic." For a second, nobody spoke. Because even outrage needs a moment to organize itself when it's competing with disbelief. Then Clarice found her voice. $10? She repeated. "After everything we've done?" "After the foundation, the events, the appearances," my grandfather said, and his tone made it clear that was the word he'd been waiting for. "Yes." Ronan laughed, but it was hollow. "You can't be serious." "I'm serious," my grandfather said. Marcus stepped forward again, controlled but tense. "Is this because of the articles? Because of the rumor about taxes? We can handle—" My grandfather's eyes flicked to him. "It's not about what you can handle," he said. "It's about what you deserve." Clarice's smile returned, but it wasn't warm now. It was sharp, defensive. "This is cruelty," she said, turning to the attorney like he could fix it. "This can't be legal. There's an estate. There are trusts." The attorney didn't answer. He kept his eyes on my grandfather because the power in the room wasn't legal. It was personal. Lila finally spoke, voice high. $10 is humiliating." My grandfather nodded once, as if confirming a point. "Good. Now you know what it feels like. Kitchen and pull travel." Ronan threw the envelope onto the table so hard the contents slid out. A $10 bill and a short note folded neatly. Marcus picked up his note and read it again, lips moving slightly. "This says, 'Spend it wisely.'" Clarice scoffed. "Spend it wisely," she echoed. "You're making us look ridiculous." My grandfather leaned back. The firelight caught the edge of his face but didn't soften it. "I've spent my life watching you," he said. "You've treated people as props. You've treated money as proof of worth. You've treated family as a brand." Clarice's eyes snapped toward me, like she'd just realized there was an outsider in the room and it offended her. "And him?" she said, pointing in my direction without looking directly at my face. "What about him?" Ronan followed her gaze. Marcus turned. Lila's phone lifted a fraction. "Hey, you guys!" The room recentered on me. My grandfather's eyes moved to mine. "He's here," my grandfather said, "because he's also family." Clarice laughed again too loud. "Since when?" "Since birth," my grandfather said. "Convenient," Marcus muttered, set in the air. The word landed in the air like a stone. My grandfather didn't correct him. He let it sit. Then he said, "Open yours." I picked up my envelope and broke the seal calmly. The paper inside felt expensive. I slid out the contents and looked down. A $10 bill, the same. A note. I read it once. Then again, the note was typed. 3 sentences. $10. No more. Not yet. If you want what you think you're owed, prove you can wait. Say nothing. My face didn't change. I folded the note and placed it back in the envelope. I set the envelope on the table like it was an invoice. Clarice watched me with narrowed eyes. "What did you get?" she asked, voice sweet in a way that wasn't sweet. $10, I said. Marcus smirked. "Welcome to the club!" Ronan let out a bitter laugh. He brought him here to watch us get punished. Lila's phone was definitely recording now. She didn't try to hide it. She wanted content. She wanted to control the narrative. Clarice's gaze snapped back to my grandfather. "So that's it? We're cut off? After decades? You're leaving your estate to charity or some assistant or—" My grandfather raised his hand again. The room quieted. Even Clarice. Even Marcus. "I didn't say what happens next," he said. "I said what happens today." He looked at the attorney. The attorney nodded slightly, like a man receiving instructions. "There will be another meeting," my grandfather continued. "Not today. Later." "How much later?" Marcus asked, and his voice betrayed him. My grandfather's eyes didn't soften. "When I decide," he said. Clarice's jaw clenched. "This is manipulation." "Yes," my grandfather agreed, casually. "It is." The honesty threw them off more than the money. He leaned forward a little, and the room leaned with him. "You've all spent years manipulating people with charm and pressure," he said. "You're offended because the same tool is being used on you." Ronan stood up, agitated. "I'm not playing your games, Gideon." "You've been playing my games your entire life," my grandfather said. "You just thought you were winning." Marcus took a breath like he was about to argue again, then stopped himself. He glanced at the attorney, probably trying to calculate options. Clarice's eyes moved to me once more, assessing, measuring. I saw it in her face. She didn't see me as a person. She saw me as a variable. Then she smiled. "Oh," she said, and the tone made my stomach settle into a colder place. "This is about him." I didn't respond. I'd learned young that reacting gives people leverage. Silence gives you time. My grandfather's eyes held mine a second longer than necessary. He didn't smile, but something in his gaze made the instruction in the note feel less like a suggestion and more like a test. "Say nothing." Clarice stepped closer to me, hands clasped, posture perfect. "So," she said, voice gentle enough for an audience, "what's your story? Did you suddenly remember you had a billionaire grandfather?" Marcus chuckled like it was funny. Lila leaned in, phone angled. Ronan shook his head and muttered, "Unbelievable." They were doing it in the open, the way people do when they're sure they can get away with it, the family joke tone. The casual cruelty disguised as curiosity. I looked at Clarice, calm. "My story?" I said evenly. "I was invited." Clarice's smile tightened. "And you came." "Yes! Ha!" "You must be very hopeful," she said, and the word was a knife with a ribbon around it, Marcus added. "Or desperate." Their eyes searched my face for a crack. "And does?" "Collar down," a flinch, anything they could use later. I didn't give them one. I picked up the envelope again, slid it into my jacket pocket, and stood. The assistant watched me with a neutral expression. The attorney didn't react. My grandfather's gaze stayed on me. Clarice's eyes followed as I moved toward the door. "You're just leaving?" she asked, louder now so everyone could hear it. "Already?" "We barely know you." I paused at the threshold and turned back, not because she had power, but because I didn't want to look like I was running. "I don't think you want to know me," I said. Marcus scoffed. "You're right about that." I nodded once like I was acknowledging a schedule, not an insult. Then I looked at my grandfather. He didn't nod. He didn't speak, but his eyes held steady, and I understood the last line of the note in a way I hadn't before. This wasn't about money yet. This was about control. About who could keep it without performing for it. I left Halston House without raising my voice, without defending myself, without asking a single question. Outside, the air felt ordinary again. The rideshare driver looked at the gates, then at me, like he wanted to ask something. I didn't offer information. I stared out the window as the estate disappeared behind trees. In my pocket, the envelope sat flat against my chest. $10. A note, and a command that felt like the beginning of a longer game. That night, I placed the $10 bill on my kitchen table and smoothed it out like a document. Then I unfolded the note again and read it one more time slow. "Say nothing." I set it beside the bill and reached for my phone. Not to post. Not to complain. To start a folder. A folder for every message, every call, every invitation, every family joke. Because I knew what people like Clarice and Marcus did when they felt embarrassed. They didn't accept it. They retaliated quietly first, and the next move, I suspected, would be aimed at me. The first message came 3 days later. It wasn't hostile. That would have been too obvious. It arrived as a LinkedIn notification while I was at my desk, halfway through reconciling a vendor invoice. Marcus Halston viewed your profile. I closed the notification and finished the spreadsheet before I allowed myself to think about it. I'd learned early that urgency is how people like Marcus make mistakes, not how they get caught. By the end of the week, the messages had multiplied. Clarice emailed from an address that looked personal, but had clearly been curated by an assistant. Subject line: Family Connection. Ronan sent a text even though I didn't remember giving him my number. It read, "No hard feelings. We should talk." Lila followed me on 3 platforms within 20 minutes, then unfollowed, then followed again. Each time she viewed my stories within seconds. Silent surveillance disguised as interest. They didn't ask how I was doing, they asked what I wanted. Clarice's email was the most polished. Dear, it was unexpected meeting you. Families can be complicated, especially with strong personalities involved. I'd hate for misunderstandings to fester. Perhaps we could meet privately? Coffee? Lunch? Ha! I'm sure we can find common ground. Warmly, Clarice, I archived it without replying. Ronan's text came next. You probably felt uncomfortable in there.
Gideon has a way of testing people.
Don't take it personally. I took a screenshot. Labeled it Day 4 Minimization. Marcus didn't bother with warmth. He messaged on LinkedIn. Let's be clear. Grandfather likes loyalty. If you're smart, you won't position yourself as an obstacle. I stared at the message for a full minute before saving it to my folder. Day 5. Implicit threat. I still said nothing. Silence makes insecure people louder. By the second week, they stopped pretending this was about connection. Clarice called during my lunch break. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was calm, amused. Sweetheart, she said, already claiming a role she hadn't earned. You're being very quiet. I admire restraint, but silence can be misinterpreted. Give me a call. We can help each other. Help.
That word did a lot of work in their family. I added the voicemail to the folder.
At night, I began to map everything. Dates, platforms, tone shifts. It became clear quickly that this wasn't random outreach. It was coordinated, even if sloppily so. Clarice played diplomacy. Marcus applied pressure. Ronan acted like a mediator, positioning himself as the reasonable one, Lila observed. Gathered, waited for a moment. That would benefit her brand. And behind all of it was a shared assumption I would break. They believed silence was confusion. They didn't understand it was preparation. The first real escalation happened at the end of the month. I received a letter, physical, heavy paper. It claimed to be from a family advisory firm. The logo was understated. The language was careful. The message summarized. You are not currently listed as a beneficiary of any Halston trust. Any suggestion otherwise is speculative. Public or private claims to the contrary could be considered defamatory. It wasn't signed by a lawyer. It was signed by a consultant. Someone testing the waters. I scanned it, saved it, labeled it soft legal intimidation. That same afternoon, Marcus posted a photo on Instagram. He and my grandfather seated at a charity event. The caption read, "Legacy is about continuity." The comments filled quickly with praise. I noticed Clarice liked it within seconds. So did Ronan. The message was clear. We're close. You're not. Still, I said nothing, because while they were busy posturing publicly, something quieter was happening elsewhere. I began to receive forwarded emails, at first anonymously. A Gmail address with no name sent a single screenshot. An internal email thread dated 6 months earlier. The subject line caught my attention immediately. Restructuring Halston family disbursements. Optics. The email wasn't addressed to my grandfather. It was addressed to Marcus, and it wasn't about charity. It was about control. The thread outlined a strategy, limiting visible distributions to family members to reinforce discipline and image while routing funds through shell foundations that Clarice and Ronan had operational control over. The phrase symbolic allowances appeared more than once. $10 wasn't a punishment. It was theater. I didn't respond to the anonymous sender. I waited. 3 days later, another email arrived from the same address. More screenshots, this time a spreadsheet. Column headers, recipient, Public allocation, private access, notes. Clarice's name appeared with a public allocation of $0 and a private access column filled with 6 figures quarterly. Ronan's line was similar. Marcus's was higher. There was a note beside Marcus's name: primary executor candidate, ensure loyalty. My name wasn't on the list, not anywhere. I didn't feel angry. I felt confirmed. This wasn't about greed. It was about narrative. They needed to look disciplined while staying indulgent. My grandfather's stunt had disrupted that balance, and they were scrambling to reassert control before he made his next move. And I was the loose end. The anonymous emails continued over the next month. Bank transfer logs, foundation board minutes, a recorded Zoom meeting where Clarice joked about letting Gideon think he's teaching lessons. In one clip, Marcus laughed and said, "He's old. He wants a morality play. We'll give him one." I transcribed everything. I checked timestamps, cross-referenced dates. Nothing was edited. Nothing sensational, just facts. Then came the pivot. Clarice stopped calling. Marcus went quiet online. Ronan sent one final message. "I think things are about to change. If you've got concerns, now would be the time to voice them." I didn't reply, because that same evening I received a calendar invite from my grandfather's assistant. Subject: family review, attendance required. Location: Houston House. Date: 6 weeks out. And attached to the invite was a single line in the body: documentation, welcome. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen. This was the deliberate delay, the long inhale before the drop. They thought the danger had passed, that I'd been neutralized by silence or scared into compliance. Clarice resumed posting about philanthropy. Marcus announced a new advisory role with one of the foundations listed in the spreadsheet. Lila teased, "Big family news coming soon," on her story, smiling into the camera like she already knew how it would end. No one noticed me. That was the point. 2 weeks before the meeting, the anonymous sender finally revealed themselves. A former Halston financial analyst, fired quietly the previous year. They sent one last file, an internal memo authored by Marcus, addressed to the advisory firm. The subject line made my chest tighten in a way nothing else had. Contingency. Non-compliant relative exposure strategy. The memo outlined a plan to discredit any family member who challenged the existing structure. Language like questionable motives, financial instability, and manufactured sympathy appeared throughout. At the bottom, a bullet point: if necessary, frame outsider grandchild as opportunistic. Preemptively limit credibility. My name appeared once. No adjectives, just a role. I printed the memo, held it in my hands. This wasn't just manipulation. It was preparation for erasure. I scanned it, backed it up, stored it offline. Then I created a timeline. Every message, every post, every payment. And for the first time since Halston House, I allowed myself a single thought that felt like weight shifting. They had no idea how exposed they already were, and they were about to choose the stage themselves. The meeting was in 14 days. They thought it was a formality. I knew it was a reckoning. And I finally understood what my grandfather had meant by "prove you can wait," because waiting had turned silence into evidence, and I now held the one receipt that changed everything. The invitation made it sound ordinary. Family review. No agenda, no attachments, just a location and a time. Halston House again. By the time the date arrived, I already knew what the room would look like before I stepped inside. Who would sit where? Who would speak first? Who would perform concern, and who would watch for weaknesses? People like Clarice and Marcus didn't improvise under pressure. They rehearsed control. I arrived early on purpose, not because I was eager, but because I wanted to see what they did when they thought I wasn't there yet. The assistant recognized me and led me down the same corridor as before. Same lemon polish, same quiet. The sitting room had been rearranged, chairs in a semicircle now. No fire. Brighter light! A subtle shift, but deliberate. This wasn't a family meeting, it was a presentation. A screen had been mounted at one end of the room. Clarice stood near it, speaking in a low voice to a man I didn't recognize. Mid-50s, tailored suit, confident posture. Legal or financial? Possibly both. Marcus was seated already, legs crossed, tablet on his knee. Ronan hovered near the window, phone pressed to his ear, nodding. Lila stood off to the side, angling her phone toward the room, pretending to check messages while clearly framing the space. No one noticed me at first. That was fine. I took a seat at the far end, placed my folder on my lap, and waited. When Clarice finally turned and saw me, there was a flicker in her eyes. Not fear. Calculation. She smiled and walked over. "You came," she said, like she hadn't expected me to. "I was invited," I replied. Marcus looked up from his tablet, his expression neutral but alert. "Good," he said. "Then we can get this over with." Ronan ended his call and joined us, slipping into a chair beside Marcus. "Everyone here?" he asked. "Not yet," Clarice said. "Gideon likes to make an entrance." As if summoned, my grandfather entered the room moments later, supported lightly by his cane, but otherwise steady. The attorney followed him, along with 2 additional people I hadn't seen before. "Witnesses!" Clarice's smile tightened. My grandfather took his seat at the center of the semicircle. He didn't look at anyone immediately. He placed his cane against the chair, folded his hands, and then finally spoke. "Let's begin." Clarice moved first, exactly as I expected. She gestured toward the screen. "We thought it might be helpful to provide clarity," she said smoothly. "There's been some confusion since our last gathering." She clicked a remote. A slide appeared. Halston Legacy Overview. It was polished. Charts. Clean fonts. Talking points. Marcus leaned forward, taking over seamlessly. "This is about transparency," he said. "About ensuring the family name remains respected, especially given recent misunderstandings." His eyes flicked toward me briefly. "Just long enough to register," Clarice continued. "We're aware that emotions can run high when expectations aren't met. That's why we wanted to reaffirm that estate decisions are private, structured, and, most importantly, unchanged." "Another slide! No new beneficiaries added," Ronan chimed in gently. "We're all family, but not every relationship is financial. And we want to protect everyone from disappointment." Lila nodded along, her phone angled down but recording. I could see the reflection in the glass frame. They were building a narrative in real time, measured, calm, reasonable. I stayed silent, because I knew what came next. Clarice turned toward me, hands clasped. "And of course," she said, "we wanted to give you space to share anything you might be feeling, privately, respectfully." There it was, the invitation to expose myself emotionally. To protest. To seem greedy. To confirm their memo without them having to use it. All eyes turned to me. I met Clarice's gaze and spoke evenly. "I don't have anything to add yet." Marcus exhaled through his nose, almost amused. "See," he said to the room. "This is what I mean. Passive resistance creates confusion." My grandfather watched quietly. He hadn't intervened once. Clarice resumed control. "If there are no concerns," she said, "we can conclude and move forward unified." She reached for the remote again. That was when my grandfather raised his hand. Not sharply, not dramatically. "Just enough. Before we conclude," he said, "I want to hear from him." The room shifted. Clarice froze mid-motion. Marcus straightened. Ronan frowned. Lila's phone tilted higher. My grandfather looked at me directly. "You've been very quiet," he said. "Tell me what you've observed." "Not how you feel," observed. I took a breath. "I'd like to share documentation," I said. Marcus's jaw tightened. "This isn't the forum." My grandfather lifted one finger. "Let him." Clarice smiled, but it was brittle now. Documentation of what exactly? I stood, unhurried, and walked to the screen. The assistant handed me a cable without being asked. Someone had prepared for this. I connected my laptop. The first slide appeared. No title, just an email screenshot. Structuring Halston family disbursements, optics. The room went still. Clarice's face drained of color in stages, like a dimmer being turned down. Marcus leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Where did you get that?" I didn't answer. I clicked to the next slide, the spreadsheet. Names. Numbers, passes, and dates, public allocations, private access. Ronan's mouth opened slightly, then closed. Clarice shook her head once, almost imperceptibly. "This is confidential," she said. "So was the memo you wrote about me," I replied calmly and clicked again. The subject line filled the screen. Contingency. Non-compliant relative exposure strategy. This time, Marcus stood up. That document is out of context, he said sharply. Then please provide the context, I said, stepping aside so everyone could read it clearly. My grandfather leaned forward for the first time. Is this yours? He asked Marcus. Marcus didn't answer immediately. Clarice tried to recover. Gideon, this is a misunderstanding. Clarice, my grandfather said quietly. She stopped. I continued, my voice steady. Over the past 3 months, I've received messages encouraging silence, implying consequences, and attempting to shape my credibility. I documented each interaction. I clicked through screenshots, LinkedIn messages, voicemails, emails, dates aligned, patterns obvious. Ronan sank back into his chair. Lila's phone lowered. She wasn't recording anymore. This meeting, I said, was framed as a review, but the presentation prepared before I arrived makes the intent clear. Clarice's composure cracked. You were never meant to see any of this, she said. I looked at her. I know. Silence followed. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that exposes structural damage. My grandfather sat very still. Then he turned to the attorney. Were you aware of these arrangements? He asked. The attorney swallowed. Some aspects, yes. Not all. My grandfather nodded once. Then he looked back at me. And you waited, he said. Yes. Why? I closed my laptop. Because you asked me to. The room held its breath. My grandfather leaned back in his chair. Good, he said. Clarice's voice rose. Gideon, this is turning into a spectacle. No, he replied. This is accountability. Marcus opened his mouth to argue again, but my grandfather raised his hand. We're not finished, he said. And that was when the second door opened. 3 more people entered the room. A representative from the foundation, an external auditor, and a woman holding a digital recorder. Clarice stared at them, disbelief flashing across her face. What is this? She demanded. My grandfather didn't look at her. This, he said, is the part you didn't plan for. I returned to my seat, folder still closed on my lap. Everything I needed was already on the screen. The only thing left was to let the truth land. And I knew, watching Clarice and Marcus scramble to reorganize their expressions, that the collapse wouldn't be loud. It would be procedural, public, and irreversible. The reckoning had begun, but the exposure hadn't yet reached its peak. No one spoke when the door closed behind the last person. The room felt smaller now, not because of bodies, but because of limits. There were fewer places left to hide. The foundation representative took a seat without asking. The external auditor placed a thick binder on the table. The woman with the recorder set it down gently and turned it on. A soft click. Clarice noticed it, her eyes fixed on the red light like it was an accusation. This meeting, she said, her voice sharp with effort, was meant to be internal. My grandfather didn't look at her. It still is, he said, just no longer private. He turned to the auditor. Proceed. The auditor stood and opened the binder. His movements were precise, practiced. This wasn't his first uncomfortable room. Over the past 18 months, he began, we've reviewed the financial structures associated with the Houston charitable entities and affiliated trusts. Clarice crossed her arms. Marcus sat rigid, jaw clenched. We identified discrepancies, the auditor continued, between publicly reported disbursements and private access granted to certain individuals. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. Specifically, he said, flipping a page, funds labeled as operational allowances were routed through secondary foundations and made available to family members while being represented publicly as restricted or non-existent. Ronan lowered his head. Clarice shook hers. That's a gross oversimplification. The auditor glanced at her. It's a documented one. He slid copies across the table. Transaction records, board approvals, signatures. Marcus's name appeared more than once. Clarice reached for the papers, then stopped herself when she realized everyone was watching. My grandfather turned to the foundation representative. Were you aware of this structure? He asked. The representative hesitated, then nodded. We were advised it had your approval. My grandfather said nothing. He didn't need to. That silence carried weight. The woman with the recorder spoke for the first time. For clarity, she said calmly, this session is being documented at Mr. Houston's request. Clarice's composure finally fractured. "You set us up," she said, her voice rising. "You let this happen." My grandfather looked at her, not unkindly, but without sympathy. "No," he said, "I watched you do it." Marcus stood again, hands spread in what he probably thought was a reasonable gesture. "This is being blown out of proportion," he said. "There's no personal enrichment here." Everything was within legal frameworks. The auditor met his gaze. "Legality is one question," he said. "Representation is another." He turned a page. "Additionally," he continued, "we reviewed internal communications." He paused, then read aloud, "Let Gideon think he's teaching lessons. We'll give him a morality play." The words landed harder when spoken. Clarice closed her eyes. Marcus's face went pale. Ronan swallowed. My grandfather exhaled slowly. "So," he said, "you performed morality for me." No one answered. He turned his attention to me. "You didn't interrupt," he said. "You didn't argue." "You waited." "Yes," I said. "You collected," he continued. "Yes!" Clarice looked between us, realization dawning too late. "This was never about money," she said quietly. "No," my grandfather replied. "It was about trust." He shifted in his chair and addressed the room. "For decades," he said, "I allowed my name to be used as insulation. I believed oversight was control. I was wrong." He looked at Clarice. "You treated discipline as optics. At Ronan. You treated moderation as a costume. At Marcus, you treated succession as entitlement." Each sentence was measured, final. Then he gestured to the attorney. "Implement the revisions." The attorney nodded and stood. "Effective immediately," he said, "all discretionary access to Halston charitable and trust-associated funds is suspended pending full review." Clarice's head snapped up. "You can't—" "Yes!" the attorney said evenly. "He can." Ronan's voice cracked. "Gideon, my grandfather raised a hand. No appeals," he said. "No performances. The review will be independent." He turned to the foundation representative. "The public statement will reflect this." The representative nodded. "Of course." Marcus sank back into his chair. Lila hadn't spoken once. She sat frozen, phone dark in her lap. The story she'd planned had evaporated. My grandfather looked at me again. "And you," he said. I met his gaze. "You will receive nothing today," he continued. "Not money, not titles, not promises." I nodded. "I understand." He studied my face, searching for disappointment. There was none. "But," he said, "you will be listed as a conditional beneficiary." Clarice inhaled sharply. "Conditions," my grandfather continued, "based on conduct, transparency, and patience."
He turned to the room. "The same conditions I should have imposed years ago."
The meeting ended without ceremony. No shouting. No dramatic exits, just people gathering their things with unsteady hands. Clarice didn't look at me as she left. Ronan brushed past, eyes down. Marcus paused once, as if he wanted to say something, then thought better of it. Lila was the last to go. She glanced back, something like shock on her face. Not at what had happened, but at the fact she hadn't controlled it. When the room emptied, my grandfather remained seated. "So," he said, "how does it feel?" I considered the question carefully. "Clean," I said. He nodded. "You kept your boundaries," he said. "That matters more than inheritance." He didn't ask me to stay. He didn't offer affection he hadn't earned. That restraint was its own kind of respect. Weeks passed. The review became public, not sensationally, but formally. Foundations announced audits. Board members resigned quietly. Clarice stepped back. "Temporarily?" Marcus's advisory role disappeared from his profile without comment. No scandals. No headlines with my name, exactly as it should be. I returned to my routines. Work. Friends. A life that didn't depend on proximity to power. My grandfather and I spoke occasionally. Briefly, practically. When he eventually passed months later, there were no surprises. The estate reflected the review. Some people received less than they expected. Some received nothing. I received what had been promised, access over time, with oversight, and the ability to refuse it if I chose. I took only what I needed, and I set terms. The last time I stood at Halston House, it was quieter than before, less polished. More honest. I left the $10 bill on the table in the sitting room, folded neatly. A receipt of sorts. Proof that silence, when chosen deliberately, isn't weakness, it's leverage. And when you know how to wait, you don't need to take anything that costs your self-respect to keep.